Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to session 4. Now, threats to security at sea has been on the rise. Piracy, terrorism, drug trafficking, and smuggling of migrants are just some of these threats, which we've also heard from session 3. Global effort is key to maintaining international peace and security to keep the oceans continuously accessible and safe for the greatest asset there is, which is the people. So, in this session, the topic is human security at sea. Our first speaker is Vice Admiral Dato Aris Aditan bin Abdullah, who is the National Task Force Commander in Malaysia. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in 1982 in the executive branch and later specialized as a navigating officer graduating from HMS Mercury, United Kingdom. He has experience as commanding officer of KD Sultan Idris I, KD Plandok, commandant of Malaysia Armed Forces Defence College, assistant chief of staff Defence Communications and Electronic Division, the Malaysian Armed Forces HQ, Commander of Naval Education and Training, and Commander of Western Fleet. He holds a Master's of Science in National Resource Strategy from Naval Defense University, USA, and a Master of Defense Studies in Social Science from University Kebangsaan Malaysia. He's also a certified training developer responsible for formulating the system approach to training in improving and enhancing the training system in the Royal Malaysian Navy. With that, the floor is yours, Vice Admiral.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nadia, for the kind introductions. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning for friends from the European country, and good afternoon to fellow members of the forum. Today, I will start with the next theme, that is human security at sea, but in NTF perspective. Our previous speakers in all the three sessions touching on three pertinent themes, basically challenges for maritime nations, existing laws, as well as economic impact. And I shall start with the human security. In the interest of time, I think it's pertinent for me as the commander of the National Task Force to actually provide the contemporary happenings in the Malaysian environment. So next, please. So my presentation, the scope is as shown, the background, strategic updates, and challenges. This is where actually the rubber hits the road, and basically we have to translate all those concepts as well as theories into action plans. And I think to be able to facilitate the understanding of fellows, forum delegates, members, so on and so forth, I think it's best that I provide you with the real happening today. So next, please. A bit of background. The formations of National Task Force, 11 March last year, when WHO announces or declared that COVID-19 is a pandemic, and back in 5th April, 202 Rohingya landed in Langkawi Island, give rise to the directive from the National Security Council for MOF to enhance the surveillance as well as control of the border security, and with Prime Minister's mandate. And we received our initiating directive from the National Security Council to form the National Task Force. And Ops Benteng was basically launched on 6th of May last year. Just to share the mandate of the former Prime Ministers, basically I just translate the Bahasa Malaysia to English. Along the Malaysian borders, there are many illegal entry points as well as routes that actually needs to be guided or guarded. Therefore, it is a directive from the Prime Minister to the Chief of Defence Force as well as the IGP and other heads of enforcement agencies in order for us to protect the integrity of our borders. Next. And this is the mission statement given to National Task Force to strengthen the Malaysian border control for the intrusions of illegal immigrants in order to curb the spreading of COVID-19. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is the compositions of National Task Force. comprising of 18 government agencies. Previous speakers spoke about collaboration as well as integration, and I can assure you, NTF is doing exactly that. The three leading agencies are Malaysian Armed Forces, the Royal Police, as well as the Coast Guard, and the rest as shown on the slides. Next. What are the roles of National Task Force? It's beautifully stipulated there to provide a concept of joint operations as well as the structure of command and control, to provide and scrutinize requirement of additional asset. As mentioned by previous speakers, that the asset that is within all the enforcement agency is not sufficient for us to actually carry out this task. Therefore, it is pertinent for National Task Force to actually coordinate all these assets from all the enforcement agency in order for us to fulfill the missions. So we actually stipulated in a very simple PDCA cycle to demonstrate what are the functions of NTF. And of course, we also have to worry about procurements of assets as well as sharing of information within all the intelligent communities. Next. Next, I will talk about a bit of concept of operation. It is basically a military jargon. CONOP, which basically means concept of operation. The border control operation by mobilizing and integrated forces to control the core, extended as well as forward area. What simply means is that the core area is the land masses. The extended area is basically extended to EEZ, and forward area is beyond that. So as you know, all of us, the enforcement agencies prior to the formation of NTF, we actually been given an area of responsibility. But with the formations of National Task Force, we have to worry about until the extent of forward areas. And how do you carry out these missions? In our planning and appreciation, we came up with a specific task. We call it the 6D, deter, detection, deny, detour, detain, as well as deport. I will talk a bit more about this the next slide. As well as border security cooperation with neighboring countries. Yeah, this is basically as what been mentioned by the Honorable Deputy Defence Ministers, the inter-government as well multilateral relationship is definitely a part of our responsibility to make sure that things are running properly in order for us to secure or look into this problem of border securities. I mentioned about procurement of national as well as coordination of logistic requirement. And finally is the National Security Council is to be provided with information as well as pointers for them to be able to provide strategic guidance and coordinating other requirements between ministries. Next. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these are the specific tasks. These are in many ways sequential, all right? Number one is how do you deter the entry of illegal immigrants by utilizing, we call it influence operation, IO means for influence operation, and to demonstrate the presence in the operational area, which I have mentioned just now. Basically is to make sure that there are presence by our enforcement agency at all times, 24/7, 365 days. Detection is basically utilizing or optimizing all the surveillance and tracking system available within and among all the government agencies in order for us to have early detections of any negative elements intents coming into Malaysian waters. Denying, in fact, this is the core of everything. All the enforcement agency, our priority one is actually to deny the entry rather than detain because of situation of COVID. So we would like to actually deny them entry rather than detain them and bring them into our own shore. And of course, detour is basically the consequence of, if possible, we want to shoo them off way before they enter into our EEZ or before they enter into our territorial water. And of course, the final stage after detain is deportation. That has to be coordinated with the Foreign Affairs Ministry as well as our friend from Immigrations. Next, strategic update. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fact that I've taken from, you can see the reference down there, the bottom left there, but this is updated until 1st of November. This is the percentage of vaccination for country within this region. Malaysia until 1st of May, in fact, until today is about 76%. It's not, I have to stress the point here. I'm sure a country in this region face almost a similar situation. It's not only in Malaysia, but what Malaysia is facing is actually entry from Indonesia, Thailand, as well as Philippines. So we'd like to invite all of you to look at the percentage. In the earlier days, when Malaysian government was talking about herd immunity, we are talking about 80%. But nowadays, we are talking about endemic. We are talking about 90% of adults to be fully vaccinated. See for yourself, this is the situation that we are facing today. Indonesian is 27%, Philippines is 19%, and Thailand is still 44%, way off the acquired or desired percentage. So remember what I told you about the mission given to the NTF? We are supposed to make sure the border is secure, no entry from illegal immigrants. So very much still relevant until the situation is improved further. Now, next, the threat analysis strategic intelligence. I give you the percentage of vaccination on the last slide. And this is the actual situation in the country around us. These are the threat exists that to me is actually a push factor. You're pushing them away from your own country, coming over to Malaysia. And the reasons are shown on the slides there. You can see Bangladesh, Bangladesh with the 1.3 million of people, refugee kept in Cox's Bazar, and some are transferred into the island of Bhasan Char. Next we go to Myanmar. The situation in Myanmar is still very unstable with the military government taking over, and coup is happening every other day. And what is the situation of Cambodia? Basically, variant Delta is actually creating a lot of problem there. Next. And next is Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, as well as Philippines. I mentioned just now, Malaysia is actually facing illegal immigrants from Myanmar, namely Rohingyas, and the Indonesians and Thailand, as well as Philippines. And you can see what is the situation there as shown on the slides. All right. Next. Now, ladies and gentlemen, after, when from the very first day itself, when with the formations of NTF, we started to collect data basing on the 7 criteria stipulated down there on the bottom left. There's a good saying that if one cannot manage the data, they will not be able to resolve any resolution. So by having all this data, we are basically able to identify 6 threat axes, right? Namely the northern part of Malacca Strait, basically Kedah, Perlis, and Penang, and western part of Penang Peninsula Coast, that is very much state of Selangor, and then state of Johor and coastal area, and northern land border of Peninsula, that is in Kelantan, as well as Sarawak and Sabah. So these are the 6 threat exits after maintaining the data for almost 1 year, 6 months now. Next. So ladies and gentlemen, can you see the difference in color? The red means reporting of cases, more than 250 cases, you return rate, and yellow is between 100 to 249, and green is 0 to 99. And you can see it's from 1st January until 31st of October. We are talking about operational intelligence. If I can guide you to the columns there, those are the illegal activity that contribute to the statistics. Other apprehensions. RBTT in Bahasa Malaysian means rampasan barang tanpa tuan, basically capture of illegal items without the owners, yeah? And expulsion, citing, as well as sea robbery. I believe the sea robbery was mentioned by the previous speakers. All right, so for this year itself, from 1st January until 31st October, we have about 5,856 reports. And they are basically divided into those 6 criteria. Next. Now you do a comparative between 1st May to 31st December last year until 1st January until 31st October this year. Now let's look at apprehensions. From 3,500, it gone down to about 1,600, about 200%. And other apprehension has gone up from 362 up to 750. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is the efficiency or the successfulness of Benteng or whatever that we have been doing, whatever that the Malaysian government is enforcing. You can see that a lot of improvement is there, especially on citing. From 403 has gone up to 1,800. The citing basically is citing of illegal immigrants, and we are able to shoo them off or deny them entries. All right, so by having these two charts placing side by side, you can see the efficiency of the enforcement agencies. Next. Now, threat exit number 1. These are the significant issues as well as highlights of exit number 1. All right, you can see the column there. We actually depicted or demonstrated the citizen from which country, and in Perlis basically is smuggling of ketum leaves and the drink itself. 549 cases reported in Perlis, and Kedah 434. Cross-border activity, where are the areas that happen rampantly? I mentioned about the illegal entries as well as the route coming into Malaysia. You can see Padang Terap and Kedah, as well as in Bukit Kayutan itself. And in Pulau Pinang, Penang Island, you can see that drug smuggling as well as international smuggling transit routes for drugs, ketum leaf, as well as exotic animals. Next, now we go to exit number 2. Same thing, I'll demonstrate to you where are they from. And in this particular area here, you could see 348 cases and Rohingya entries. And what is alarming is you can see the one in red, 4 positive COVID-19 cases, whereby it comprises of 15 Burmese as well as 1 Indonesian. And why are the exit point? They are coming from where? Tanjung Balai Asahan, Sumatra, Dumai, Pulau Rapat, Indonesia. And their landing space or landing preferred points are shown on the coastline. But in this particular case, it is near Pulau Keri, Tanjung Sepat, and Sungai Pelek. All right? And gentlemen and ladies, look at the smuggling control group, 6 cases coming, about 23.7 million happening in Port Klang. All right, next. Now I would like to share the threat exit number 3, that's in Johor, 387 cases and 8 positive COVID-19 cases involving 19 Indonesians. And you can see the highest party entry is 30. That's happening in June, 12th of June, and 54 on the 23rd of August. And ladies and gentlemen, for your info, ever since we adopted opening slowly for Malaysia economy, and in September, we actually apprehended 1 entry with 56 illegal immigrants. And out of 56 illegal immigrants, 7 of them are positive COVID. Next. And this in threat exit number 4 is basically in Kelantan. You can see there 1,306 cases. And where are the cases? And what is more alarming is that the entry of party Rohingya in the same Myanmar coming into Tanah Merah, 17 of them, 7 of them are positive. Right? These are basically smuggled through coast, our border town there, and quite scary actually. We just found out that out of almost 60% of Rohingya coming to Malaysia is actually smuggled through Kelantan border, right? And Ketum is also one big issue there. Next, Sarawak, basically at the border of Sarawak and Kalimantan, and more often it's just coming across for looking for jobs and all that. You can see the cases there, 915 of them, and a lot of deportation is happening in Sarawak, all right? And smuggling of goods like cigarettes, liquor, wine, happening quite rampant in that particular sector. Next. Next, of course, Sabah. I know you know very well. Many speakers mentioned about ESCOM. I know in this, I'm sure all of you are aware, most recently Abu Sayyaf group been arrested by the Royal Police, and I know positive COVID from all the illegal immigrants. Thus far, for this year, is only 3 cases, right? And you can see the in the boxes there, how many of them are apprehended in this sector itself. 1,259 cases is a big number. Yeah? Next. Picture paint 1,000 words. This is actually happening off Malaysian water. These are Rohingya landing back in June last year in Langkawi. Next. And these are basically routine. It's happening every day. All right. Last night we apprehended about 21, is it? About 21 of them. So, gentlemen and ladies, it is still it's contemporary. It's happening every day in Malaysia. All right. Next, the challenges. Human security versus national security. You know, all of us, the enforcement agency, in many times we are placed in this oxymoron or this paradox of choosing between human security as national security. This is one challenges that we really need to be addressed. You know, and conflict in neighboring country. I did mention about that situation in Myanmar, as well a bit in Thailand. And unpleasant conditions in refugee camp. I spoke about Cox's Bazar and Basancha. In our own detention center itself, because of its overwhelming figure, kept in the detention center is very, very not conducive at all for our immigrant camp there. And close proximity between land masses, between our peninsula and Sumatra, and the shortest distance between the two land masses is as short as 35 nautical miles. If a boat moves at 35 knots, it takes them, less than an hour to crawl across, and reaction time for enforcement agency can be as little as 20 minutes. And economic disparity between citizens and those immigrants coming over from Indonesia, Philippines, and all that. I'm sure this is another push factor for them to come across. And one of the pull factor is actually the family relationship between those who are already here and those who are coming, and syndicate, or in this case, we call them tekong. I really want to invite everybody that is involved in this maritime security community to actually look at this, bearing in mind that people coming thousands and miles away from Bangladesh to Malaysia, expecting them as individuals to actually arrange such kind of trip is basically next to 0%. So it is definitely organized crime. So, in fact, the National Task Force would always like to be proactive in such a way that, before even they actually set sail from whatever destination, we have to stop them there rather than trying to be reactive when they have set sail towards Malaysia. So the the involvement of other government agencies as well as ministry is very much is very pertinent in this particular issue, and we are working very hard on that. Next is on barter trade. This aspect of it really need to be re-evaluate as far as we are concerned. I think it doesn't benefit Malaysia too much, but rather it is benefiting countries around us. Next. Busy shipping route as well as shifting modus operandi. Yeah, these are the challenges that the enforcement agency is facing. Once you find a way to handle them, they always shift to other approach. They always use the environment or the situation to their advantage. And until this very day, National Task Force were able to identify 136 different modus operandi carried out by all these syndicates, and we have to be on top of that. Workforces in agriculture sector, I think all of us are fully aware. The minister just announced that we were trying to look for the best approach at SOP to bring in another 32,000 to assist us in agriculture sector. This is something that we are watching very closely. NGO versus enforcement agencies. For as long as the NGOs, UNHCRs and the enforcement agency cannot see align their mission, sort of have an understanding, the MKN 23 is going to be an issue for us. I think we have to change our habit, change our attitude in this particular aspect. We should be working as a team rather as an opposing forces or entity. Logistic support as well as asset and personnel, we mentioned about is never enough, but we have to make do with what we have. That's why one of the main responsibility of National Task Force is actually to coordinate and try to maximize whatever that we have now and future procurements. Influence ops is basically a site, something to attack the mind and the psyche of our target group, so that all of us will put forward or make sovereignty of a country as the first priority, as well, the safety and security of the country as the first cardinals before or other missions or other objectives that some other agency might have. And finally, is the choke points. We have a lot of choke points in running our operation. I just mentioned 3 there. Basically, the detention center that we have within, as well as prosecution of court cases and the MKN 23. These are the constraints that we are facing, and we need to resolve this before we can actually do better. So, in conclusion, gentlemen and ladies, the COVID-19 situation actually gives rise to more awareness of illegal immigrants as well as other illegal issues in the maritime arena. NTF is created to safeguard the border, as well to provide space and time for our government agencies to recalibrate as well as reset the internal situations. And there are a lot more to do, but guys, we have to start somewhere. And I think NTF and the rest of the enforcement agencies will continue to integrate as well as collaborate among us to make sure that we can have a better and secure environment in Malaysia. Thank you so much. I hand over back to you, Ms. Nadia.
Thank you, Vice Admiral Dato Aris Aditan, for a very detailed presentation. And I think Malaysia has taken many measures to accommodate these illegal immigrants, which include refugees and asylum seekers. But of course, there are limitations to that. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, it has especially become an even more delicate situation. Our next speaker should be able to delve deeper into this when talking about refugees and asylum seekers. His name is Mr. François Kernin, who is the head of the Regional Mixed Movement Unit in UNHCR Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. In his capacity, he works on issues related to asylum and migration, smuggling and trafficking, and protection at sea. Prior, François was a Regional Durable Solutions Officer with UNHCR Regional Office in Amman, Jordan, focusing on the Syrian crisis, where he supported regional coordination efforts and provided legal and operational advice on various issues. Previously, he led and coordinated activities aimed at addressing the needs of refugees, internally displaced persons, and stateless persons in context of natural disasters and armed conflicts. Francois graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a Master's in International Relations from Sciences Po Grenoble. The mic is yours, Mr. Francois Kernin.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, participants. It's a real pleasure to be here for this very interesting and relevant conference, and an honor to be part of this distinguished panel. Looking at the concept of human security in the context of refugee movement, it's something that's very pertinent. I mean, looking at countries of departure, the applying or realizing the concept of human security could contribute to solve refugee crisis in ensuring that people don't have to leave their country and can enjoy their rights to the fullest where they live. The concept is also relevant in countries of asylum, where realizing human security can ensure dignity in exile, as well as enabling refugees to contribute to the maximum of their capacity to the host community. In some contexts, it can also pave the way towards durable solutions for them. During my presentation, I will be touching upon three different topics. First, I will give a brief overview of recent refugee maritime movements in Southeast Asia. I will then be discussing throughout my presentation how together we need to strike a balance between national interest and legal obligations, or in other words, between legitimate security concerns and the protection that we owe to vulnerable individuals. And to do so, I will look at a number of good practices to protect refugees at sea along their journey, so from the country of departure to the country of arrival. So that brings us to my first topic. For many years, Rohingya have been fleeing persecution in Myanmar and have crossed the sea in search of safety. Some have left directly from Rakhine State in Myanmar, traveling, for instance, towards Malaysia or neighboring countries. Others have first sought refuge in Bangladesh and in the refugee camps there, where to date almost 1 million Rohingyas are still living. Many of those Rohingyas have taken the sea, crossing the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea, often with the intention to reach Malaysia. And to give you one figure to describe the scale of those movements, I mean, since January 2020 last year, we have recorded approximately 2,800 Rohingya refugees attempting this journey. And here, a key figure that's very worrying is that during the same period, 245 refugees have died or gone missing at sea. I mean, that's almost 1 person out of 10 who has attempted that journey who did not survive it. So that's a real serious concern for all of us. There are a number of reasons for which refugees may have died at sea. I will just mention a few. The first, abuses by smugglers and traffickers. So as you know, those journeys are organized by smugglers who have usually full control over the boat, or using violence to maintain order on the boat. And we have heard from refugees a number of reports of abuses, physical abuses, sexual abuses, as well as killings. The smugglers are also often, to maximize their profit, often keep very limited supplies on board of those vessels. And many refugees have also died of starvation or thirst after they have spent extended period of time at sea. Needless to say, many of the vessels that are attempting their journey are not seaworthy, and they are also facing difficult sea conditions, especially during the rainy seasons. And the figures I have on the slide today are probably only the tip of the iceberg. Many deaths are never reported, and many bodies are never found. It's important also to highlight that among the survivors, so the people who manage to disembark from those dangerous journeys, 60% of them were women and children. So we have really seen a shift in recent years with an increase in the number of women and children who are taking this desperate measure of taking a boat in search of safety in another country. Before I go further into good practices, I wanted to touch upon a little bit on the difficult balance that we should strive to achieve. So it is obvious that we need to better protect refugees at sea. The high number of deaths occurring in recent years is not acceptable. But for it to be a realistic objective, we also need to consider the perspective of states who are often the intended destination of those refugees. For those states, they have an interest in controlling their borders. They don't want to face what they sometimes perceive as an excessive burden compared to other neighboring states who may not share responsibilities. But today's discussion is important and relevant because those two objectives are not mutually exclusive. We can realize human security, as it is formulated for this panel, while also ensuring that states' legitimate sovereign and security interests are met. So those two objectives can work hand in hand. And here on the slide, I'm talking about states' obligation under international refugee and human rights law. But those are only the formulation in writing in treaties of the needed protection that the most vulnerable deserve and need. And so I will highlight some avenues to do so in my presentation in the following slides. First, one of the key challenges states face, and we have heard it during the previous presentation, is the irregular movements of refugees, maybe also other groups of people on the move. And those irregular movements are of concern to all of us for different reasons. First, of course, people moving irregularly may enter a state's territory without the approval of the competent authorities, sometimes without the knowledge of those authorities. People entering irregularly into a country may not go through the necessary public health measures, which are particularly relevant during the current COVID-19 pandemic. And lastly, it's also a concern because those movements have been sustaining and supporting the business of smugglers. And so that's something that we certainly don't want to encourage, in particular in light of those abuse I was referring to earlier. And here I wanted to highlight two types of good practices that we have observed in the region and in other parts of the world that can contribute to reduce or and limit the irregular movements of refugees. The first avenue is that we should work together to reduce the need for dangerous irregular journeys. And that starts by protecting refugees in their country of departure. If the rights of refugees are respected, if they have opportunities in terms of education and livelihood, they are far less likely to attempt a very dangerous boat journey across the sea. And here I should highlight in our regional context that in Bangladesh, some of the key reasons that refugees are highlighting in their discussion with us are accessing education, accessing livelihood opportunities. So those opportunities that they cannot fully realize where they are, and that are sometimes motivating them to move to another country. And reducing the need for dangerous irregular journeys, it's also looking at the country of origin. And here, or applying human security can ensure that we can realize the conditions for the voluntary returns of refugees to their country of origin in safety and dignity. The second aspect is giving alternatives to refugees. So instead of working with smugglers to cross borders and the sea, let's ensure that there are some legal pathways that state can manage closely, that will ensure oversight by the border authorities, but also giving opportunities to refugees to access education, to access livelihood opportunities, to join their family members, so they don't have to find alternative dangerous pathways to do so. The second challenge that I wanted to highlight was protecting life on the high sea. The high sea is this body of water that's outside of states' territorial water. And of course, that's an area where often there is no clear responsibility for who is supposed to rescue the boats that may be in distress there. And or at least a reluctance from some states to act when it's outside of their territorial borders. This protecting life at sea is even more challenging because smugglers are by nature keeping their journey clandestine. They will never issue a distress call if this means that they will be at risk of being arrested by the authorities of a country. And here, I think, again, there's two avenues that we can explore. One is, the first one is that in all circumstances, we should save life without discrimination, irrespective of the legal status or the nationality of the people who are in distress at sea. And that's the direct translation of our obligation under the law of the sea, which reflects a long-standing maritime tradition where at all time sailors have rescued other seafarers that were in distress at sea. And here I highlighted two concrete actions that can be taken. The first one is that we can strengthen arrangements for communication and coordination for the rescue of persons in distress at sea. And by this, I don't only mean internal coordination within different state agencies, but also coordination with neighboring states, some of which may sometimes have better capacity to rescue a vessel in a particular location. We also need to realize that the threats that refugees are facing at sea are not only limited to a boat sinking or having a shipwreck. The threats to life are also the results of the abuses by smugglers on board, and we need to adopt a humanitarian and precautionary approach in the way we identify and respond to potential distress situations. The intervening on the high sea is challenging for any states, and that's why a regional approach is needed. And there's been a number of commitments in the past, for instance, through the Bali process, to put in place a comprehensive approach that will address both the law enforcement issues, but also the protection issues that are part of those movements. Here I'm mentioning two concrete actions that I think opens opportunities to strengthen this regional cooperation. The first one, some of you may be aware, there is within the Bali process a task force on planning and preparedness, which was established to support states in implementing, in better planning for maritime movements of refugees and migrants. There's a number of training and other policies that are developed in the context of this mechanism, and that's a mechanism we should really support and engage with meaningfully. The second mechanism I highlighted in my slide is the ASEAN Trust Fund that is created after the 2016-2015 Andaman Sea crisis, with the objective to support countries that are responding to irregular movements in Southeast Asia. So there are the resources that could be mobilized to support countries at disembarkation to implement humanitarian activities, capacity building, or others. And that brings me to my last slide. The third challenge that states are facing is that once boats have been disembarked on their territory, there's a number of issues that will be faced at that moment. And the first one is that will be among the people who were on the boat, there will be people with different needs, different profiles and rights. You may have refugees on board, you may have victims of trafficking, you may have people who experience gender-based violence on the boat. And so those needs need to be identified quickly to ensure specialized services are provided in time. And I wanted to highlight two good practices here. The first one is when, in the context of disembarkation, we have seen over the past 2 years that protecting refugees, protecting asylum seekers, is not mutually exclusive from respecting and implementing public health measures. There's been a number of disembarkation cases across the region where quarantine measures, medical testing has been implemented following disembarkation, preventing any risk of COVID-19 spreading. So those good practices can be replicated in different contexts. So at the same moment, as mentioned earlier, it's very important that we do identify persons with specific needs. So that assessment can be done by expert teams that will then ensure referral to a number of actors who have the expertise to provide that assistance. I mean, among other, I'm mentioning here UNHCR Malaysia, but there are also a number of international NGOs, international agencies that have the capacity to work with the authorities to make sure that those needs are addressed in a timely manner. And needless to say, as soon as we identify the needs, the earliest we do that, the better placed we are to also work towards a solution for those people. And lastly, one good practice that we have seen in our experience across the region and further away is alternatives to detention. We have seen that alternatives to detention have prevented a number of mental health issues among survivors and have in general contributed to their well-being, but have also reduced a number of financial burden for the state of disembarkation. To conclude, I mean, refugee maritime movements are complex and present challenges for all involved. I mean, at UNHCR, we stand ready to work with the government of Malaysia and others to overcome those challenges together. In the room, some of my colleagues from UNHCR Malaysia are present, and I'm sure we'll be happy to continue this discussion in more details and what can be done concretely, operationally to achieve those challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Mr. François Kernin. Now, you said without discrimination. I think we can all agree that the right thing to do is to help and protect the lives of refugees as much as we can. They have fled their country of origin for a number of valid reasons. So this is a good way forward. Thank you again to Mr. Kernin. Now, before we conclude the MiDAS-KAS conference on maritime security, let's hear from Ms. Jane Chan Git Yin, who is a senior fellow and coordinator of the Maritime Security Program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Her main research interests include maritime security issues in Southeast Asia, law and order at sea, regional maritime cooperation, and confidence-building measures and regional boundary delimitation and territorial disputes. Over to you, Ms. Chan.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nadia. A very good day, one and all. A quick note of thanks to all the organizers and friends from MiDAS-KAS for the kind invitation. A privilege to join this important event and to share my thoughts. We've heard panels before ours contemplating and discussing important issues on maritime security environment we're all confronted with today. And as we come to the end of the conference proceeding, I'm very glad that we have a dedicated panel to think about the human security aspect. We hear both Vice Admiral Dato Aris and François highlight that the competing interests between national security to that of human security. And I have to admit, as an analyst myself, very often when I think about maritime security, the starting point is also top-down, right? I will start with, doing a current assessment of the strategic environment, consider what are the specific threats and challenges, what might the international conventions, laws, and rules say. I may also think about the role of international and regional institutions, so on and so forth. So it is common, for example, for issues related to seafarers, for example, to be mentioned last, or not featured at all in the broad conversation about maritime security. So given the limited time that we have, I will dispense with concepts and definition and to simply raise 3 issues related to the broad theme. And I have to emphasize that this is going to be very broad and not nuanced. And it is within these 3 areas where, in my mind, the human security discussion should be more prominent. First, on climate change and the correlating issue of sea level rise. Second, on safety at sea, focusing more on the predicament of seafarers. And third, to touch briefly on crimes at sea. So on to the task at hand. First, on climate change, sea level rise, and the correlating human security issue. This is timely since the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, is ongoing as we speak. And already we have heard leaders of island states made impassioned appeals, arguing not only that the rest of the world should act in its own self-interest, but that it has an obligation specific to those of the island states. I know the theme of this panel is at sea, and I took the liberty to include land at sea to highlight that we will be confronted with at sea in the not so distant future. The risk and cause of climate change has long been known, and the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, in its most recent report in August 2021, concluded that climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying, with some impacts such as sea level rise now irreversible. So since the topic on climate and sea level rise is really not in my area of expertise, I will simply highlight one of the angles that maritime security analysts like myself are looking at, and that is the legal implication on law of the sea, especially on provisions with reference to sovereignty and sovereign rights of states, entitlement of these island states, and the correlating enforcement issue at sea. Policymakers and academics alike are looking into how states would defend their existing territories and maritime resources in accordance with international law when dealing with rising sea and land loss. Of course, more are thinking about the existential questions for these countries and their people as whether statehood could continue if a nation were to become uninhabitable, and the legal rights and implications for citizen mobility if people are to be relocated. No doubt, some of this impact won't be felt immediately, but nonetheless need to be discussed now. To some, it may be futile to discuss hypothetical of yet to be displaced people, but the issue of migration, legal or otherwise, will become real even before the islands and atolls become underwater features. And it will be even more difficult to ignore the more immediate problems of, for example, changes in fishing resources, a food security problem, for example, with shift in species distribution, or some facing total wipeout, which has challenged international and national ocean and fisheries governance. We heard panels before us and previous speakers discussing about IUU fishing earlier today. So, it is one aspect of that problem, so no need for me to reiterate. Now, to move on to my second point on safety at sea, and mainly to feature the challenges seafarers face at sea during this pandemic, though I do want to mention here that I have no intention to make light the conditions at sea pre-COVID, as it is also an often neglected issue. In the last couple of years, the safety of naval operations and commercial shipping drew very serious reflection in the region and beyond. Today, I will mainly focus on the commercial side of things. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought about a disruption which many of us did not foresee, and it has led to significant impacts on the shipping industry. It created significant hurdles to crew changes and repatriation of seafarers, which raise serious concern for the safety and well-being of seafarers and the longer-term development of the shipping industry. The International Maritime Organization, IMO, has classified this phenomena as a humanitarian crisis. On top of that, we all know that vessels operated by overworked and mentally exhausted seafarers will increase the risk of accidents at sea. So we see IMO and many port states and the shipping industry still working very hard together to manage this crisis. So let's not forget that this issue is not just about seafarers out at sea, or it's one that we can keep out, so to speak. The ability to ensure our sea lines of communication remains open and secure is premised upon the fact that ships are still plying these waters with seafarers aboard. So it is therefore critical for our continued prosperity and security, and for many it is also about survival on land, to have essential supplies, to get to where they are urgently needed. And this is where I want to draw attention to the number of maritime incidences in Southeast Asia that has long been neglected even before pandemic. So what are some of these maritime incidences? I'm referring to vessels sunk or capsized, grounding, fires, medevac, collision, etc. So the Information Fusion Center here in Singapore reported the following numbers, which I'll share in a bit, within its area of interest recently at the quarterly shared awareness meeting held in mid-October. So from January to August 2021, on average, regional countries conducted more than 40 search and rescue operations per month. And just within 2021, more than 2,500 people were rescued from sea, but there were a total of 701 reported deaths or missing at sea. And this includes seafarers, fishermen, and other sea users. So on to my third and final point, which is about crimes at sea. Maritime Southeast Asia remains heavily exposed to the various non-traditional security threats. We have heard, both the Vice Admiral and François talk about this, and previous speaker as well. No doubt, the safety and security of seafarers at sea pre-COVID do receive some attention. In fact, it is the single element for consideration which all stakeholders, shippers and enforcement agency alike can all agree on. And I really learned this firsthand in 2016, when we at RSIS worked on a regional guide to counter piracy and armed robbery against ships in Asia, led by the Recap Information Sharing Center, together with the Information Fusion Center and the various international shipping organizations, for example, ICS, OKIM, Intertanko, BIMCO. And to let you know that we are currently working on an updated version of this guide, and I can assure you that that securing and ensuring safety of the seafarers is the primary objective of such a guide. And this is a real concern that the current economic situation perpetuated by the pandemic may push more into illegal activities and could threaten the safety and security of regional waters. Take Southeast Asian waters as an example. While most of the attacks at sea were petty thefts by an armed perpetrator, if left unchecked, right, piracy and armed robbery will fester and put sea lanes, but more importantly, seafarers and other users of the sea at risk. We recall the kidnap for ransom cases in the Sulu-Sulawesi Sea, although the last actual incident was more than a year ago. But between the year 2016 to 2020, more than 80 hostages were kidnapped at sea, with 11 killed. And the last 4 hostages held in captivity were rescued by Philippines authorities off Tawi-Tawi only in March this year. IUU fishing has been mentioned by many speakers yesterday and today, but apart from looking at it from the sustainable angle, right, as an environmental concern and a food security issue, there is also a very real and serious concern about the sometimes appalling conditions on these fishing vessels for fishermen. Some of them are subject to other criminal operations such as human trafficking. So to conclude, there's no doubt that the topic of human security within the international security studies literature is a standalone subject matter. What I hope I've managed to do is to highlight that in the study of maritime security, the damaging effect of the various maritime security threats, such as piracy and armed robbery, IUU fishing, trafficking, smuggling, environmental concern, and so forth, do have a human security dimension that we ought to consider. So these threats to maritime security are well known, and the frequently raised question and recommendation on what we need to do, I'm sure we all know by heart. So do let me just to simply join the other speakers in this conference to reiterate the importance of a whole of government approach, utility of a cooperative and multilateral approach, and not to forget the importance of public-private partnerships, as we have seen in efforts to address our concern for seafarers, both from the industry, government, and international organizations alike. I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Ms. Chan. Thank you for sharing your analysis and also concerns on how scenarios at seas have changed, whether it's due to climate change or the COVID-19 pandemic. It is hoped that we can work together better, and this conference is a great platform for a start. Now, I would like to open up the floor for questions. We do have one already in. This question comes from Dato Pahlawan, Dr. Ma'amin Muslan, and the question is for Vice Admiral Dato Aris. His question is, combating illegal immigrants, especially in Malaysia, has become a chronic problem. What are the key changes and success factors that the NTF have brought in order to make it a success?
Thank you. A very good question, Dato Amin. We often heard that intelligence drives operation. With the creations of NTF, we are actually be able to have this a community, we call it Combined Intelligence Working Group, comprises of all the enforcement agencies in that working group. As you know, this intelligence committee, they are very protective and very secure, very secretive about the intel. They won't share. There is a great breakthroughs. Like for instance, I did mention about the illegal the illegal entry points, the route and all that. Now, by having this CIWG, we are actually able to accumulate 660 entry points, illegal entry points. And we can classify them as active, not so active, and not active. By knowing that, we can actually preempt and actually put our enforcement agency in place. Just to give you a bit of statistics, until this very day, the National Task Force are basically able to capture about 26,000 illegal immigrants. The ROI, as far as assets is concerned, is accumulating today is about 670 million. We are able to apprehend or capture about 550 ships and boats, and more importantly, like for instance, the government is now giving a weather warning to citizens and worrying about flood. But for us in NTF, we are worrying about flooding of entries, illegal entries. You know what? High tide is happening at the highest tide on the 6th or 7th of this month, whereby it's as high as 5 meters in some area. Basically, the boat can actually go until your doorsteps. So these are the warnings that we provide to all the enforcement agencies in all the entry points. We actually look at the moon phase, we actually look at the weather and coordinate all the intelligence input and share with all the component commanders. That's why, what is more importantly is, I think I need to inform all members of this forum here that at any one time, we got about 25,000 enforcement agencies, members of enforcement agencies on the ground doing this. And they are aligned and they are coordinated. Thank you.
It's a comfort to know, Vice Admiral, that we are coordinated, we are working together and collaborating, because after all, greater coordination and also responsibility sharing among states are what's needed for us to carry on and proceed and move forward. So with that, thank you to all of our speakers for session 4. Unfortunately, we don't have much time for the Q&A, but again, I'd like to remind our audience members, if you do have any questions, you can still keep them coming in through the public chat box, and our speakers will be able to answer them offline through that platform. So thank you to our speakers for session 4, Vice Admiral Dato Aris, Mr. François Kernin, and also Ms. Jane Chan. To our audience members and participants, don't go anywhere. We have a special closing ceremony coming up before we officially wrap up the MiDAS-KAS conference for 2021. I'll see you in a few moments.